Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity that is mine in being here. I always look forward to coming to the Great Fort Worth Lectures. I've been doing so for a number of years, and I know many of you have just made it a January habit to be right here in the Fort Worth area for this great lectureship. And I've always enjoyed the question and answer period or the open forum. I think I've always gotten a great deal of information when I have attended sessions like this. I've often thought that one of the most productive things about the Freed-Hardeman lectures across the years was the great open forum conducted by Brother Guy and Woods so successfully for so many years. But we can learn a great deal by asking questions, and I certainly am in total agreement with what Brother Whitten has suggested about the format of the program. I will read a number of questions. I'll comment somewhat on my answers to them, and then give anybody in the audience that wants to add a comment or subtract from what I may say or disagree from what I may say. And feel free to do any of these. I really never have had a great deal of respect for a person who would ask for help on a passage, and if I happen to be in disagreement with him, then he'd get mad at me because I didn't see it exactly eye to eye as he did. Well, I assure you that the one conducting the open forum this afternoon is not going to become angry with anybody that might be in disagreement. Brother Roy handed me the questions from yesterday. I regret that I was not here. I really had my plans made to be here. I got up at 5 o'clock yesterday morning and drove to the Little Rock Airport. We can come from Little Rock to Dallas for so much cheaper rate than Memphis, and I was supposed to catch an 11:30 flight out, and Delta didn't have a plane to bring us to Dallas. So I spent nearly all day in Little Rock yesterday and had to miss the open forum. I've taken the questions that have been turned in and have tried to keep them in the order in which they have been turned in. First question, what can be done with churches who accept any and all divorced and remarried people? Now, the Lord has a law in regard to marriage, divorce, and remarriage. It is set forth in Matthew 5:31-32, in greater detail in Matthew 19, verses 3 through 9. Really, the Lord's will in regard to marriage is one man for one woman for life, with one exception, that one exception being fornication, that enables the person who is innocent to put away the person who is guilty and enter into another marriage with somebody who is eligible. Now, many times people just do not respect that. Now, a person may respect that, may have a mate, may have a wife or husband who has not been faithful to the marital vow, and maybe puts away that individual in harmony with the Lord's law, with the exception is set forth in Matthew 19:9, and may enter into another marriage which is certainly legitimate. We're not talking about those kinds of divorced people today. They come under the teaching and under the favor of the Lord's law. But what about those people who pay absolutely no attention to the Lord's law, just up and divorce at will, marry second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth mates, and then present themselves to congregations and expect to be accepted regardless of their marital past? And unfortunately, we have a number of congregations that are just willing to open their arms of fellowship and say, basically, it doesn't make any difference whether you're living with wife number 2 or wife number 22. We care, and you come and be with us. What ought to be done with churches that have that kind of reputation? Oh, they certainly ought to be marked. They ought to be known as congregations that are lax and liberal as far as the Lord's law on marriage and divorce is concerned. And the same thing would be true if a congregation is lax and loose in any other realm of a failure to respect the law of the Lord. It ought to be known throughout the length and breadth of the brotherhood, especially in the given area, that here is a congregation that is not going to honor the law of the Lord. The Lord did not mind marking the Ephesian congregation as a group that had left its first love, Revelation 2. He did not mind marking the Sardis congregation as a congregation, most of whom were dead spiritually. He did not mind marking the Pergamon and the Thyatira congregations as congregations that were allowing false teachers to come in. And he certainly didn't mind marking the Laodicean congregation for its lukewarmness, its apathy, its unconcern. Seems to me that that's what ought to be done with a congregation that is liberal along those lines. I have a list of several questions here, and really these fall into the category of situation ethics. In Ephesians 4:23 through 25, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Now, some questions that grow out of these passages in Ephesians 4. Is the Christian obligated to every person to give a complete and honest answer to any question? I don't think we're obligated to tell everything that we know on any given occasion. The Lord did not do that. In fact, upon one occasion, when his enemies asked for his authority, he said, I'll also ask you a question. You answer my question, and then I'll answer yours. The baptism of John, did it originate in heaven, or is it human authority? And they decided they would not answer. And the Lord said, neither do I answer your question. Again, when the Lord stood before Herod, that despot, in Luke the 23rd chapter, he did not answer the wicked Herod a single word. He met everything that Herod said with a withering silence. There are times when it might not even be best to tell some of the things that we do know. For instance, if a person were to come to me with a problem of a personal nature and say, I want this problem to stay with just you and me. I want you to help me work it out. And I promise that it will stay between the two of us. Suppose a third party comes along and says, I saw somebody come into your office and talk to you. I'd like to know what that conversation was about. I don't believe I'm obligated to break a confidence and tell him completely everything that was said. Now, any answer that we do give, it ought to be an answer that is filled with honesty. If not, or for whom or what are the exceptions? Well, I've already given some of these. Or if complete honesty is always right, then please explain the following episodes. And of course, anything that we say ought to strictly be on the side of honesty. Then on both sides of the paper here, there are listed a number of examples taken from various parts of the Bible. Jeremiah the prophet told a falsehood to Shephatiah, son of Mattan, Gedaliah, son of Pashur, Jehukal, son of Shelemiah, and Pashur, son of Malchijah, in Jeremiah 38, verses 24 through 27. Now, if you have your Bibles, let's turn to Jeremiah, the 38th chapter, because I do not believe for a moment that the weeping prophet, the great prophet of Jerusalem, told any kind of falsehood in this matter. Jeremiah, the 38th chapter, and of course, remember Jeremiah is the great prophet that prophesies in the years right before the Babylonian captivity and on into the Babylonian captivity. And of course, throughout this book, the princes, the rulers, Zedekiah and others are opposed to him. It just appeared to the ruling forces that Jeremiah is a traitor, that he has sold out the nation. But really, Jeremiah was the greatest patron that the nation of Judah had. Now here are the verses that I've been asked to comment on in Jeremiah 38, 24 through 27. Then said Zedekiah unto Jeremiah, let no man know of these words, and thou shalt not die. But if the princes hear that I have talked with thee, and they come unto thee and say unto thee, declare unto us now what thou hast said unto the king, hide it not from us, and we will not put thee to death, also what the king said unto thee. Then thou shalt say unto them, I presented my supplication before the king, that he would not cause me to return to Jonathan's house to die there. Then came all the princes unto Jeremiah and asked him, and he told them, according to all these words, that the king had commanded. So they left off speaking with him, for the matter was not perceived. So Jeremiah abode in the court of the prison until the day that Jerusalem was taken, and he was there when Jerusalem was taken. If you go back to the previous chapter, Jeremiah the 37th chapter, and begin in verse 16, you'll note these words. When Jeremiah was entered into the dungeon and into the cabins, and Jeremiah had remained there many days, then Zedekiah the king sent and took him out, and the king asked him secretly in his house and said, Is there any word from the Lord? And Jeremiah said, There is. For said he, Thou shalt be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon. Moreover, Jeremiah said unto the king Zedekiah, What have I offended against thee, or against thy servants, or against this people, that you have put me in prison? Where are now your prophets, which prophesied unto you, saying, The king of Babylon shall not come against you, nor against this land? Therefore hear now, I pray thee, O my lord the king, let my supplication, I pray thee, be accepted before thee, that thou cause me not to return to the house of Jonathan the scribe, lest I die there. Then Zedekiah the king commanded that they should not commit Jeremiah into the court of the prison, and that they should give him daily a piece of bread out of the baker's street, until all the bread in the city was spent. Thus Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. When the princes came to inquire of Jeremiah, he was simply directed by King Zedekiah to say, I've made my supplication to the king. And this refers back to the passage that I've just read. I don't believe there's any falsehood at all practiced by Jeremiah in this passage. And then a woman hid David's spies, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, in a well. Absalom's servants came and asked a woman where Jonathan and Ahimaaz had gone. She gave them a misleading answer, 2 Samuel 17:18 through 20. Now, I would no more say that we are obligated to justify something that somebody says, either in the Old Testament or the New Testament, that's wrong, than anybody would be obligated to defend me or to defend you if we did something that was out of harmony with the truth. She, I think, made a mistake here in giving them a misleading answer, and there could have been another answer that would have been given without any kind of deception at all. Then another example, David feigned insanity at the court of Achish, king of Gath. He drooled on his beard, taken from 1 Samuel 21 and verse 13. Now, David was not a perfect man, and in feigning or pretending himself to be something that in reality was, I would have I would not be any more willing to defend him in that than anything else that he did that I believe might have been wrong. And then Jonathan lied to his father Saul about David's whereabouts, 1 Samuel 20:28 and 29. And if David was not with his family in Bethlehem, then of course Jonathan is not to be vindicated for making a misleading statement. Another example, 1 Samuel 19:14 through 17, Michal, this would be the daughter of Saul, too deceived her father's messengers to abet one of David's escapes, and then she lied directly to Saul about why she had done so. Of course, in this connection, she suggested that it would be best for David to leave, that his life was in jeopardy, and then, of course, she said that David had threatened her life, which, according to the record, he had not done so. I don't believe Michal's to be defended in making a statement that was not entirely true. Now, not all of these fall into the same category. For instance, the one about Jeremiah did not fall into the same category as some of these others. The next one that is mentioned, I think, does not fall into this general category. God told Samuel how to trick King Saul, 1 Samuel 16:2 and 3. This is when the Lord gave instructions for Samuel to quit his grieving over Saul, now the deposed king, and to take the cruse of oil and to go to Bethlehem in order to anoint the one to be the second king. Well, Samuel immediately raises an objection and says, if Saul finds out about it, then he will kill me. Not only that, but I think Samuel must have realized that something like this might even start civil war, in which there might be a number of lives lost. When he took the matter to the Lord simply told him to take a sacrifice and say, I have come to Bethlehem in order to sacrifice. And as it turned out, that's what he did do. And in addition to that, he anointed David to be the future king. I don't believe there's any trickery, any deception on the part either of the Lord or the part of Samuel. Samuel just simply does what the Lord told him to do, and he went there with two purposes in mind. But if asked why he was going, he was simply to give one of the purposes for which he went. Another example, Rahab is praised in Hebrews 11:31. Her act of faith was traitorous to her own city. She hid the two Israelite spies and lied to her king about them. Joshua chapter 2, 1 through 6. And come to think of it, how open and above board are any spies or those that send them? Well, let me respond to the last question first. There are some cases in the Bible where it was right to engage in spying. Remember the 12 spies that were sent out under God's direction with Moses' full approval, and their purpose was to look over, survey the land, and bring back a report to the nation that had shortly come out of Egyptian bondage. And so that was eminently right that they do so. It was wrong, however, for the 10 spies to come back with their report that we cannot take the land, though a great and good land it is. It was eminently right for Joshua and Caleb to stand up and say, we, through the Lord's help, can take the land. Now, in regard to Rahab, I believe she's praised in Hebrews, the 11th chapter and verse 31, because of her faith. I don't believe she's any more praised in misleading the matter of where the spies were than she's to be praised in her former manner of life, namely that of harlotry. She had climbed above that and ultimately climbs into a position where she becomes a great and faithful woman, and is even in the Lord's lineage line according to Matthew, the 1st chapter. But she's not praised in Hebrews 11 for what she might have told, but her faith in the fact that a greater king than the Jericho king needed her allegiance, namely the Lord God of heaven. Another example, God through Moses told the children of Israel to borrow jewels of silver and gold from their neighbors because they were about to leave the country. Exodus 11, 1 through 3. And so the people spoiled the Egyptians. Exodus 12, 35, 36. Oh, this was done under the direction of the Lord. And remember, the Egyptian people had made slaves out of the Israelite people, had robbed them of their freedom, had robbed them of every firstborn son that had been cast into the Nile River, had robbed them of everything that people hold near and dear, and this was just simply God's system of righting some things that had been wrong. And really, when it came time for Israel to leave, the Egyptians were so glad to get rid of them that they hurried them out of the land, glad to give them whatever silver or jewels or whatever had been requested. And again, this does not fall into the same category of some of these others. Then Exodus 1, 15 through 20, God gave families of their own to those Hebrew midwives who disobeyed the Pharaoh's command to kill the male babies and then lied to him about it. I believe they're commended because they didn't carry out Pharaoh's orders, not necessarily commended because of any falsehood they might have told. Here's a case of where a divine law is higher than the human law. Just as in Acts, the 5th chapter. Well, let's go back to chapter 4. The Sanhedrin told Peter and John, don't preach anymore. And Peter and John respond by saying, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto judges, more than unto God, you can be the judge. As for us, we're going to continue to do what we have been doing, namely preach and teach Christ. because we have a higher commission than that which comes from the Sanhedrin. We're doing what the Savior has told us to do. Or as Peter said in Acts 5:29, when again they were told to quit their preaching and teaching, Peter, spokesman for the entire other 11, said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Here's a case with the midwives where they were told by Pharaoh that upon the birth of every Hebrew baby boy, they were to kill that child. They did not do this, and God commends them for it. And then Rahab, or rather, this is Rahab, but I believe it should be Rachel, stole Laban's images. Then, when his men were searching her tent for them, she seated herself on the saddle where she had concealed them and claimed to be menstruating, and Jacob scolded Laban for his accusations. Oh, Rachel's not to be commended for doing something that was clearly in the wrong, but on the other hand, Laban is not to be commended for having these idols in the first place at all. And of course, Jacob was not in the know in regard to this. I have several other questions, but maybe I've set forth something that some of you would like to respond to, either about the first question regarding marriage and divorce and families that just, congregations that receive anybody that is divorced, or some of these other questions taken from various parts of the Bible. Do we have any comments from anybody? All right. Brother Jackson, I may get all these questions, and you may not have any left for tomorrow. All right, Brother Perry. Let's wait till the microphone comes. This is Brother Perry Cotham.
Is it not true that in Exodus, in regard to bari, from the Egyptian, the word is ask, sometimes ask, and not in the sense of borrowing, as we think of borrowing and then returning?
That is eminently true. I'm glad you made that clear.
Thank you.
That is very true. They did not borrow these things with the idea of one day returning them. Anybody else on any of these matters? All right, the next question. Contrast the likenesses of liberalism and legalism. And the person that turned this question in gave me a little bit more in detail about what he had in mind by this question, talking about those who at one period of their life can be so ultra-conservative and then at a later period of life can just lead an ultra-conservative position and just jump clear over into the field of liberalism. And all of us have known people that have done that very kind of thing. For instance, when I began to preach in the latter part of the 1940s and the early part of the 1950s, men like Ketcherside and Garrett and others could scarcely find anybody that they would fellowship. Now they can scarcely find anybody that they won't fellowship, except a few of us. They won't extend the lines of fellowship to us. But it just seems to me that when men like this made a complete flip-flop from an ultra-conservative position in which they argued such positions as it's wrong for a congregation to have a preacher work locally with them. And I remember hearing Leroy Garrett in Nashville a number of years ago, and he could come and stay 10 days and preach for a congregation and a gospel meeting, but it would have been wrong, I guess, for him to have stayed 10 weeks and labored for that congregation. They said it was wrong to teach the Bible in colleges, and yet Leroy Garrett had studied religion at Harvard. They said that there ought to be mutual ministry. I remember that as one of their positions, and yet when they began to make a change, they did almost a complete flip-flop, and many of their adherents or devotees or supporters just went wherever they were led. And it seems as though that there is such an easy line that can be traveled between this legalistic position and then an absolutely liberalistic position. I thought Brother Clark did a fabulously great job this afternoon in discussing legalism. And a person is not a legalist who defends the idea that we must go by the Bible. In fact, I believe with all of my heart that we show our fidelity and our loyalty and our sympathy and our love for the Lord by honoring what He has said. I've been told that in the Old Testament we have about 1,613 laws. The Ten Commandments originally given, and then another 603 that were added to them. Well, the Israelites that lived under that law showed their respect and loyalty and love and attitude toward God by honoring Him, not just an outward performance, but one that touched both the heart as well as outward performance. And of course, when they did, as sometimes they did in Isaiah's time and Amos's time, when they just offered with the external and their hearts had not been touched at all, then it's quite obvious why God was displeased with such at all. But in the New Testament, somebody asked me a while back, just how many commands do we have in the New Testament? And I decided in reading through the New Testament one month that I would note down every time that either the Lord or one of His apostles or one of His inspired writers either gave a commandment or a charge or an authoritative statement. And I noted a little over 2,200 such in the New Testament. Well, people honor the Lord by honoring His law. Now, if we were to just honor it by simply an outward or external kind of faithfulness, one that never touched the heart at all, that would make the legalist part of it. But to simply say, I believe what God says, or as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, I believe, therefore have I spoken, meaning that he was sincere. Whatever he taught, he believed with all of his heart. And of course, we sometimes in churches of Christ have been accused of not having a heart religion. We've always preached the importance of putting our hearts into our religion. We are to believe with the heart. The Bible heart is composed of the intellect. It is composed of the emotional nature. It is composed of the willpower. It is composed of our conscience. And all of these are involved in our obeying the gospel and our continuing loyalty to it. And a person is not legalistic by wanting to know, what does the Lord say? One of the most faithful elders I have ever known, I remember being at his funeral service a number of years ago. And a man who had served as a deacon under him was making a comment about this person who had been a long-time elder. And he said when anything would ever come up, his question always was, what does the Bible teach? Well, that's not making a paper pup or paper pope out of the Bible. That's not making the Bible into an object of worship. This man recognized that the Bible is God's expressed will. It is His message to us, and we show our honor, we show our glory and respect for Him by honoring Him and what He has said. Liberalism, on the other hand, really does not care what the Lord says about the matter. The liberal becomes his own lawmaker in deciding what is important or not important. A few years back, it would be hard to find liberals among churches of Christ. Now they can be found in great abundance. And it just simply means that we've departed from that determination that long characterized us as a people, that we were going to be a people of the book, speaking where the good book speaks, being silent where the good book is silent, calling Bible things by Bible names, and doing Bible things in Bible ways. And so it's so easy for a person with a totally legalistic approach to swing over and become liberalistic. Let me get one other thing in mind or before you, and then we'll open it again for any discussion or comment. I realize that failing to encourage and show consideration for your brother and sister is a sin. When members of the Lord's body forsake the worship continually, can they be disfellowshipped for non-attendance? If so, How do you disfellowship someone who has chosen not to be in fellowship? Well, exactly the same way that we would disfellowship somebody that is in immorality, that has accepted a false doctrine. There is a procedure that needs to be gone through. Certainly these people need to be taught. They need to be gone to. If they're elders of a congregation, they need to be besought to come back and be faithful. Members need to encourage them as they have opportunity. We're missing you. Something is lacking in our assembly. And of course, we're talking now about people who could be there who are not there. Not talking about a person who is 95 or 98, faithful for 50 or 60 or 70 years, now confined to a bed through infirmity of the flesh, and doesn't go out of the house to go anywhere. It's not the kind of people we're talking about. But those who can go anywhere they want to, Monday morning through Saturday night, but just never see fit to attend faithfully the worship. Remember, Hebrews 10:25 tells us, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. I think it's rather interesting that the very next few verses talk about apostasy. If we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sin. And of course the willful sin here is a complete repudiation of Christ, turning away from Him, rejecting Him as our Savior, as our sacrifice. And when one does that, then there is no more sacrifice for sin. Because the Lord's not going to send anybody else to die as a lamb for us. He's not going to send us another church that we can be members of, not going to send us another Bible if we are displeased with the one that we have. I've often preached, and I think correctly so, that when people begin deliberately to miss Wednesday night, and then soon Sunday night, and then soon Sunday morning Bible study, and then come maybe once or twice for the second worship period or the hour of assembled worship on Sunday morning, that those people have already begun to walk down apostasy's pathway. They're already headed in that direction. It's always seemed significant to me that in the writing of the Bible, the church having begun as it did upon the day of Pentecost, that we go for about 3 decades before any writer in the New Testament talks about church absenteeism. There are 2 or 3 little places where I go for meetings occasionally, and I'm always impressed when I go there because they have something that most of our congregations don't have. I held a meeting for an Ohio congregation a few months back, and through the years they've had the reputation that we'll have just about as many people on Sunday night or Wednesday night or during a gospel meeting as we do Sunday morning. And I've been there for a number of meetings over the years, and the attendance will scarcely ever vary at all. Well, not many congregations can say that, but it ought to be true with all of our congregations, unless it's just impossible for people to come. But when people become proverbially absent and deliberately are rejecting the services of the church, I believe they need to be disciplined. Any comments about these last 2 questions from anybody? All right, Brother Workman.
Well, Robert, several things you said sparked some thoughts in my mind. Just right there toward the end, I was thinking that it seems to me that among the very large congregations that are in many metropolitan areas today that we see moving so fast in the direction of liberalism, look down at many of the rest of us and say, well, those people over there are legalists because they're always criticizing what we want to do, and the assumption on their part is that they're more spiritual, perhaps, than those legalists that want to be more strict. But I've noticed, and I wonder if you've noticed the same thing in the areas you've been, that in many cases like this, where you have a congregation, and of course not every large congregation necessarily fits into this mold, but so many do. But it seems to me that so many of these will have a tremendous gap between the Sunday morning attendance and the Sunday night attendance. We've been accustomed, I think, at least in places where I've been across the years, to see maybe 2/3 or half in many places will be back on Sunday night. I'm thankful to say that where I worship in the home congregation, it's like the one you mentioned in Ohio, where it scarcely varies at all. But I've noticed in some of these super large congregations that have the reputation, or they think among themselves at least, that they're so spiritual, you might not have a third there back on Sunday night. And on Wednesday night, you might as well close the doors because hardly anybody's around. And so this is one thing that caught my attention in what you were saying, but also another thing regarding the legalism thing. It seems to me a good passage for all of us to remember is Luke 18 and verse 9, where Jesus introduced the parable of the Pharisee and the publican by saying he spake this parable, or Luke says he spake this parable unto those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous. And to me, that is the heart of what legalism is. They trusted in themselves rather than in God.
All right, I think those are fine observations, and I've noticed the very same thing that Brother Gary has talked about. And interestingly enough, some of these people who imagine themselves to be giants in spirituality are the very ones that seldom ever will be there Sunday night or Wednesday night, or many times on Sunday morning if something else happens to conflict. And I certainly appreciate what he had to say about the legalism, especially that great parable. Okay, anybody else? Okay, down here, Brother Sexton, then we'll get to the back. If you'll wait to the microphone, then everybody can hear you.
There's just a thought that I'd just like to inject here about, the churches that are having trouble today. And, of course, I've lived a long time, as you have. And it used to be the time when when new members would come in from somewhere else, a family or a man and his wife, we'd want to know about that person. We want to know where he stood, whether or not he was well grounded in the faith. And I remember where I was a member of the church years ago back in southeast Missouri, that my dad was an elder, and the elders there at that particular congregation would always want to know about a person that moved in from somewhere else before they'd use him to wait on the table to teach a class or anything else. But it seems to me that we want members so bad today that people through the years have come in, and the elders and the preachers know very little about those people until they get a foothold. And then when they do, then there's trouble in the church, and to keep them having trouble, they go along with more or less what's being taught or what that person has in mind. And then the preaching that we've had, and it seems to me like in some areas, I call it blackmail, that the preachers have been blackmailed into staying away from certain issues and certain things, and some elders have been blackmailed by the preachers too in some areas, that we've gotten so far away from what the Bible teaches that you don't have people in the pews anymore that really know what the truth is. And when error is taught, sometimes elders and even preachers, they don't know what it's all about. And I remember last year I was very much encouraged, and you may be familiar, I know you are, familiar with Millport, Alabama. I held a meeting there. It's the first time that I've been to a congregation in years where they brought pews in chairs in, and placed them in the aisles during the week for the gospel meeting. Now, we used to have that happen years ago, and that's a congregation that have as many on Sunday night as they have Sunday morning. And that has been characteristic of them through the years, as I understand it. But we need to get back in the right spirit, of course, teaching the truth in spirit and love, but stand firm and know who's coming into the congregations that we serve.
That's an excellent observation. In Bible times, they had their letters that they sent from one congregation to another congregation, and that would be an excellent practice today. But this would be simply a point of wisdom for every eldership to know the kind of people who are coming in, where they stand, exactly what they believe. Okay? Back at the back.
Go ahead, Joe.
Brother Taylor, this is disturbing to my mind. We have people that come and then they fall away. And I want to cry about it. We've got members of the church don't give a hoot about them. They'll come and they miss, and then finally they want to withdraw fellowship from them. I don't think that I can face God in the day of judgment if a person in the congregation where I preach misses a while and then I don't go to find out what's the problem and bring him back. So when we talk about withdrawing fellowship from that one that has forsaken the assembly constantly, how many of us have gone and put him on our shoulder and brought him back? I think we ought to, every one of us, open our eyes that we are responsible for that one that has ceased to come because something was wrong. And I found it to be true, and we solved that, and they come back.
All right.
Am I wrong?
Excellent comment.
Am I wrong?
No, you certainly aren't. Okay, right here.
Brother Taylor, you mentioned a while ago, and I agree completely with the procedure we should go before disfellowshipping and so forth. You made the comment as to we should mark the congregation that is definitely known for these things, or an individual should be marked. But I think we need help in that procedure as to how it should be done so that the member may participate. We know it's his obligation to do this, but help us a little bit along these lines of what is the congregational responsibility and the individual responsibility in marking or and not fellowshipping those that are in error, if you can.
Of course, it can be done by faithful elderships who acquaint their own congregation with such and such a congregation. Say, here's B congregation that is faithful and loyal. A congregation 10 blocks over has become liberal, has become lax, has become loose, no longer standing where they once did. And I believe Congregation B has an obligation through its preaching, through its teaching, through its elders to let its members know, and as they have opportunity to let others know exactly where this congregation number A stands. Well, I didn't get to...
Brother Taylor,
okay.
I'd like to add just this too, that it was brought out yesterday, and just being a member, I'd like to say it, that all of this procedure is absolutely no good unless I fulfill my part. And it begins with the preacher and with the elders and the members. All the disfellowship is nothing unless we really try. The only time we should associate with them, I think, is in an effort to bring them back and not put our arms around them at preachers' meetings and at elders' meetings or when we see them on the street. Is this too radical?
Well, of course, we're told by Paul in the Thessalonian epistles, count them not as enemies, but admonish them as brethren. And, of course, that's a part of helping to bring them back. Brother Eddie said that we ought to quit at 20 after. I'll turn in the 3 questions that I did not get to Brother Jackson, and he can deal with them tomorrow. Appreciate your participation and the excellent way that you have listened.